In this video, I want to talk about what Jordan Peterson said that Jung said about Nietzsche. Okay, so we're going 3 layers deep here into the collective unconscious, but just stay with me a little bit. So basically, I've been studying Carl Jung. I've read a few of his books so far, so I'm still at the beginning of my journey. I'm yet to go through his entire collected works, even though I've hit little pieces here and there. But a large source of the information I'm going to be sharing in this video comes from Jung's seminar on Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So I was recommended by Jordan Peterson himself in a live Q&A to read that book, and I'm going to be releasing a few more videos of stuff I've found in that book. So if you like that, please subscribe and follow my journey of interacting with these ideas. And so please forgive me if I do get something wrong, or if I kind of misrepresent an idea or a person, because like I said, I am trying to grapple with these ideas, and to be quite frank and honest, both Nietzsche and Jung are pretty, contradictory, kind of confusing people to learn about, okay? So please forgive me as I grapple with their content. But let's get into it. So basically, Jordan Peterson said that he commonly repeats this message, as he says Nietzsche, with his idea of the Superman, basically tries to says that as an answer, as a formulation to the answer of the death of God, which pretty much is the death of all the culture's values, because the culture and the culture's values would be rooted in the idea of God as a substructure of that culture's psychic reality. Therefore, if God dies, then all the values of that culture die as well. And so Nietzsche is famous for propagating that idea, the death of God, but he also tries to answer that idea by formulating the idea of the Superman, or the Overman, or the Übermensch. And that's basically, I mean, I'm sure it is a very complex kind of idea, okay? But in basic, if we can basically pass out what it is, it's that you create your own values, right? And I'm sure it's more than that, because when I'm reading it, you really get a sense of this deep kind of meaning of what it is. And it doesn't do it quite enough justice to just say you're creating your own values. But essentially that's what it is that, in the collapse of values, then we take up a responsibility to be kind of gods ourselves. Because if we could kill God, then we have maybe the power to become God in a sense, or become the force that creates our own values, kind of thing. So that's what Jordan kind of puts forth, that Nietzsche is someone who answers the problem with the Superman, but he doesn't quite flesh out that idea before he kind of goes insane, right? And then Jordan Peterson would say that then Carl Jung would meet that idea with, well, no, hey, let's slow down there. It's not so obvious that you can actually create your own values, but that actually you kind of discover your values through your dreams, through the kind of the dreamlike imagination around. You discover these values that seem to emerge out of the unconscious. Okay, and so Peterson would say that Jung would meet the death of God with his life's work. Okay, and so his life's work was, that process of individuation and, the collective unconscious through getting back in touch with the archetypes and the archetypal realities that lay underneath the religious substructures of our psyche. And so it would be kind of interpenetration between the conscious and the unconscious to re-establish our values or something like that. Okay, so rediscovering our values and then revivifying them, so to speak. And that would kind of be Peterson's take on Nietzsche and Jung. Okay, now that's Peterson. I think he does a pretty good job there. But when I actually delved into Jung's seminar on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I'm getting like a similar vibe and understanding of what Jordan was talking about. But I also get the sense that, see, Jung in the seminars, Thus Spoke, in his seminars on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is psychoanalyzing Nietzsche through his work. So he's doing a psychoanalysis on, he's doing a psychoanalysis on Nietzsche, but he's doing that by applying his analytical psychology, so his brand of psychology and psychoanalysis, onto the text of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, as if it was like a dream or a mythology to be analyzed. So he's doing analytical psychology on the text. And as he's doing that, we learn not only about the text, but we learn about the man Nietzsche. And so Jung is really kind of bringing up a diagnosis on Nietzsche. So it's a criticism, really, of Nietzsche. And so I do get the sense that it would be good to go and kind of look at Thus Spoke Zarathustra for what it is without this added Jungian perspective on Nietzsche as well, because I think I'd like to kind of get at what maybe Nietzsche was trying to convey in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And I think that Jung gives a good perspective on that, but it's more about analytical psychology than it is about just Zarathustra, And so there's a complexity to all this. There's so many layers of kind of complexity, and these figures, I don't quite understand their entire philosophy yet, because I'm just at the beginning stages. I've only read a few books by Jung, and I've listened to a few seminars, 30 hours worth of seminars on Nietzsche, and I've read a little bit of his work, but and obviously I've read all Jordan stuff and his understanding of it. But I like to kind of, because people can get things wrong. I'm not saying that Jordan has got it wrong. I'm just saying that, I'd like to come to my own conclusions and things as well. So even though I highly value Jung's criticisms on Nietzsche, I'm still hesitant to fully accept them. But some of them I do accept regardless of how they do impact on Nietzsche's philosophical understandings and underpinnings. I take the psychological analysis of Nietzsche from Jung pretty seriously. And so basically, let's just kind of, I'm going everywhere with this because it's such a complex topic, basically what I'll say is it seems as if Jung agrees with Jordan, obviously, because, that makes sense, by Jordan's view that maybe Nietzsche was going a little bit in the wrong direction as far as it was a bit pathological to put forth the idea of the Superman in the way that he did. And Jung would point towards the fact that Nietzsche actually did kind of go insane. And Jung formulates basically the reason why he did go insane, Nietzsche went insane, is kind of because he identified too much with the archetype that he was trying to creatively express. So he identified too much with Zarathustra himself, even though when we do look at it, like, from what I've been taught at least, that, Zarathustra was not meant to be Nietzsche. There is evidence that he kind of distinguishes a little bit between them, but what Jung's saying is psychologically he didn't distinguish enough between them, and that he kind of that archetype used him so much to an extent. The wise man archetype, he identified with it too much that he had an inflation, which Jung talks about as an inflation, which is you identify with the greatness of the archetype, and you identify with the things you are writing that are coming out from you as you, instead of something deeper within you that is flowing through you. That's kind of Jung's criticism on Nietzsche, and that ultimately that is what sent him insane, and that he wasn't actually able to live out the philosophy he put forward into actuality in practical life, because he actually was quite a loner type person. He was actually quite poor and supported by a pension, and some rich friends he had supported him, but he actually wasn't that integrated into the real world. And so because Jung puts forth that's what individuation is that integration, like a interpenetration between the unconscious and conscious, where you are actually living in the world as well. Like Jung would say, the number 1 and number 2 personality are both operating at full force, and Jung's criticism on Nietzsche would be that his number 2 personality, so that creative type of personality, fully took over, and he just unleashed that on the world, and no one could relate to him or understand what he was talking about, right? And so in formulating the idea of the Superman, Nietzsche would have great difficulty presenting this idea to the public, because no one could really have the right context to receive it. But it's very interesting, because although Jung criticizes Nietzsche, it seems as if he secretly agrees still with Nietzsche. He just doesn't agree with the process of how he manifested the ideas and how he actually lived his life and went about going through what Nietzsche actually did. He seems to disagree with the method, but not the ultimate ideal, so to speak. But you have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, because Jung, he even says himself in his autobiography, Memory, Dreams and Reflections, that he always has to hint at things to people, and so you really do get a sense that although Jung seems to have his disagreements with Nietzsche, at the same time, he's kind of working towards the same end, but his diagnosis of how to get there and the process to get there might be a little bit different. But ultimately, he's still praising Nietzsche because Nietzsche formulated the problem and maybe can see a creative solution as well. But the implementation of that solution, I think psychologically, is where Jung is criticizing Nietzsche. So let me flesh that out a little bit, because it's just, from the viewer's perspective, that might sound a bit hard to understand. So let me read this quote here to give us some grounding. Okay, so this is Jung in his seminars on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, okay? Well now, the idea of being active and violating others also shows in Zarathustra's idea of the Decalogue, the tables of values. He says, "Behold, the good and just, whom do they hate most? Him who breaketh up their tables of values, the breaker, the lawbreaker. He, however, is the creator." But he is... Okay, so that's Jung quoting Zarathustra, right? So there you've got Zarathustra basically saying that the lawbreaker is breaking up the values, but he is also actually the creator. So he's looked at as just a lawbreaker, but really he's actually one who creates values, okay? And now here's Jung continuing to speak. and criticize that. But he is the destroyer. No good breaking the tables of values. They are weak enough already. You had better hold that little bit of value together. They need no particular wildness because they will break all up by themselves and altogether too early. We know from history that values begin to break up long before there are new ones to take their place. Therefore, we always go through a time of destruction when people are without orientation and without laws. Usually only the greatest misery forces people to create new laws and new values. If Zarathustra were not so impatient, the man Nietzsche could follow him. He could give Zarathustra the right rhythm, prevent him from being too impatient. Then he would not talk of breaking the tables of values. They could be preserved a little longer. They are weak enough. They will break up without our help. It is not necessary to destroy churches. Nobody attacks Islam, but the mosques are empty. Nobody attacks Protestantism, but innumerable people never go to church on Sundays. To break up things is merely the impatience of inflation. Okay, so a lot of Jung's criticisms on Nietzsche are psychological. They're criticisms on the development of Nietzsche's psychological expression. Okay, so Jung basically says in other areas that he could have helped Nietzsche if Nietzsche wanted help, that to kind of get through a lot of these different psychological and emotional disturbances that Nietzsche was having. And part of that, and Jung says that he would have prevented Nietzsche from writing Zarathustra, because it seems as if writing that project really did produce in Nietzsche an inflation and an identification with the ideas and with the archetype of the old man and the archetype that was being expressed through Nietzsche. And that's really done a big psychological damage to him. And Jung basically shows that as how not to get that damage is to, I guess, personify them and separate them from yourself. So separating your ego from these ideas and from the archetypal reality or stronghold that is coming up. Okay, and so that's having that separation allows you to still create. And then Jung says that he should have maybe wrote something like, and these are my ideas, Nietzsche's ideas on the subject, instead of writing as if he was Zarathustra. And so, it's a bit confusing there, but, you kind of get the point there, okay? He identified too much with Zarathustra, and that gave him psychological damage. Because if you understand what Zarathustra represents, which I might as well get into right now, which is basically Zarathustra represents a new set of values, right? And so there's the symbology in the story where basically he meets an old man in the woods, and the old man, according to Jung, represents, say, Christianity or the old values. And Nietzsche, in a sense, is kind of like the old man as well. So he is the one that, it's hard to explain because we're talking symbolically about a text that I haven't really shown you the text yet. So it's a bit of a hard thing to explain, but basically Zarathustra is a Christ-like figure, okay, who has come at an age where the end of good and evil has kind of lived out its purpose. Like, it had a purpose. It's not like, it was there for no reason. Actually, Nietzsche picked the historical character of Zarathustra because Zarathustra is actually an historical figure who is said to actually have developed, I think, 700 BC, something like that, who's said to actually have developed the idea and dichotomy of good and evil. And so Nietzsche's idea is that Zarathustra created the idea of good and evil, and that gave rise to, say, Christianity and Christ and all that. And then Zarathustra is, say, another Christ-like figure returning back to update with a new revelation on, okay, now we're going to go beyond good and evil, because Zarathustra introduced good and evil, 2,700, 3,000 years ago. And now Zarathustra is coming back to kind of revivify and give the new message of the Superman. Okay, so a new set of values that we can now create our values, going beyond good and evil. And so that is kind of what the message is there. And Jung saying he identified too much with Zarathustra. And the whole point of me saying that is that if you understand what Zarathustra is, kind of psychologically, the same as you can understand what God is. So when we say the death of God, you say, well, the whole cognitive structure of people is collapsing because it lays on the foundation of God. We can say, well, this Christ-like figure Zarathustra is bringing a new kind of value system and structure in place of the God that is now dead. We can see that there is a psychological framework which Nietzsche is identifying if he identifies with Zarathustra himself. And so you see how it's like, say, if I identified with God and I said, I am God, and then I had this crazy thing, and it's not just merely identify with God on the surface here by saying it, but something happens in my absolute psyche, like let's say the physiological component of my psyche or something like that. The part of the idea of God that is deeply connected to my psyche actually starts to warp and change. And then that would impact my psychology, something like that. It's a bit of a hard idea to explain, but I hope I've shot enough out there to kind of get at it, okay? And so that's why Jung is stressing this so much. So yeah, so let's get back to this Jung quote here that I read out earlier. And so that's right. So Jung basically wants to preserve Christianity, okay? Because he's basically saying that Zarathustra is growing too far and too fast, way too quickly. But at the same time, he's not denying it, because he says here that if Zarathustra were not so impatient, the man Nietzsche could follow him. So in other words, he's passing out this relationship between Zarathustra and Nietzsche, the man who actually wrote the work. And so if Zarathustra were not so impatient in displacing the old value system and substantiating the new, then maybe Nietzsche, the man, could slowly integrate this new process, okay? This new set of values. And so Jung isn't disagreeing with the fact that maybe in the future we can actually adopt something like this Zarathustrian type change in values. If anything, he's actually encouraging that, because he says that it's necessary, because he says in other places, there's other quotes here that I've got it written down somewhere else, that basically... Yes, here we go. The Christian symbol is still alive because millions of people are alive who need it very badly, even. And for them, everything is still contained within it. Anticipating, one might possibly say, what we get through the collective unconscious in a certain form. For we constantly need Christian concepts in order to understand the collective unconscious. We apply Eastern concepts as well, but we also amplify them in order to explain what is in the Christian symbolism. It is true that late Christianity has a peculiar one-sidedness which doesn't fit our time. But that so-called spiritual attitude was once perfectly sound. It had to be. The knowledge of the conditions of antique civilization makes you understand why such a religion as Christianity was needed. Every emphasis laid upon the spirit was absolutely necessary. One cannot imagine what the world would have come to if such a reaction had not taken place. So Jung kind of looks at these kind of like, I guess, these structures that hold together societies and people and people's framework and psyche. And so Jung admits that the Christian conceptualization as it stands now, that's important, as it stands now, so it has chance to evolve in the future, it doesn't contain everything and it doesn't match our time. We can't live a full life through the Christian image anymore as it is developed unto this day. So Nietzsche has got it right and correct. But at the same time, we can't just switch so fast over because, and I'm going to make another video about this, about atheism and Christianity and what Jung thought about the two, because we'll get into it and I don't want to blow that away here. But yeah, he thought that switching over too quickly is just impossible. And it's not something that's good psychologically, okay? Or even achievable psychologically. And so that's why he wants to preserve Christianity, okay? But he doesn't deny the fact that maybe Christianity can't evolve, that symbol can't evolve, and maybe something what the Superman that Nietzsche is talking about, that we can't still arrive there. Because in this quote here, he says that if Zarathustra were not so impatient, then the man Nietzsche could follow him. So he's saying that Nietzsche could probably follow him. So we could probably come to terms with the idea of Zarathustra, maybe in a future age, because not everybody's ready for that yet. But there are some people who might be ready for that, and maybe we could come to terms with the change of what's happening at the base, the very, the core of the deep core of what is flipping over. With this idea of Zarathustra. So it can be sometimes hard to explain these deep ideas because you can kind of feel them more than you can explain them sometimes. And I hope I've tried to give it as much justice as I can. So I'll make a few more videos later on Jung's conception on Christianity, on Nietzsche and Christianity, and on Jung and atheism and Christianity as well, because he talks a lot about that in these Jung seminar on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So I'm going to continue to release videos on this topic. I'm going to continue to read through Jung's collected works and other books, and study Nietzsche on the side. So if you like that, please subscribe. I hope I presented something of value here in this video, and I'll see you in the next one.